just hit the subscribe button, the red button, underneath this video over to the right, and that'll sign you up on my YouTube channel. And then you can hit the small bell icon, so a little bell will go off and tell you each time I've started to broadcast a new one. I hope you enjoy it. There's a curious duality that at the start of the country, when the Constitution was first written, slaves in the South were counted as 3/5 of a person in the United States Census. So even though they couldn't vote and they were technically somebody else's property, these slaves were counted in the census, and congressional apportionment was based on counting them as 3/5 of a person. And in all, 12.6% of the United States population were slaves. So that 12.5% got reduced by 40%, and that amount was then incorporated into the population base in deciding how many congressmen each state would have. And since it determined the number of congressmen, it also determined the number of electoral votes, which is the House plus the 2 senators from each state. So from the very beginning, slavery was used to pad the representation of the South and give it more representation than it deserved in the Union. And this was one of the basic compromises that was necessary to set up the Constitution. And it, by the way, helped elect Thomas Jefferson, who without that provision would probably have lost to Adams in 1800 when Adams ran for a second term. The whole idea that you use people that can't vote as 3/5 of a person to pad the election results, or to pad the Electoral College and the Congress, was disgraceful and embodied in the Constitution until slavery was outlawed. But something remains in the Constitution, which is that it says that the census shall be of all inhabitants of the United States. Not citizens, not legal people, but every inhabitant of the United States. And right now the estimate is that 7% of the population of the United States are immigrants, whether here legally or not, who are not registered voters, not citizens, and can't vote. But even though they can't vote, they're counted in the census. So in colonial times, or post-colonial times, in the pre-Civil War period, 12.5% of the population was counted as voters when they shouldn't have been, and now 7% is when they shouldn't have been. And it pads the representation of states like California, Texas, Florida, and others where large numbers of immigrants are. For example, in California, which is 10% of the country's population, it gets 12.5% of the country's electoral votes and congressional delegation because of the number of immigrants who are padding that voting total. Now, this has topical relevance now because the Trump administration wants to include a question on the census that asks whether people are citizens or not. And the left is raising hell about that and suing about it, claiming that it will have a chilling effect on response to the census, and that people will not be willing to complete the census form if they're asked whether they're citizens or not, worried that they'll be used as the basis for deportations in the future, and that therefore people won't be willing to say it. And at stake is the overrepresentation of the Northeast, not the Northeast, of the I was going to say of the slave states, of the heavily immigrant states, as a result of the large immigrant population. Now, we can't do anything about that. Inhabitants is in the Constitution and not likely to change it. But we should realize that our system of electoral votes and of congressional delegation is distorted by the same level and kind of unfairness as the slavery provision was prior to 1860. I've just written a new book, 50 Shades of Politics, which is unlike anything I've written before. It's a series of 100 short 2 pages each, autobiographic essays, and stories and vignettes and tales from my career in politics, my time with Clinton, my work in 40 countries around the world and in every state in the country. You can't buy it in bookstores, but you can online at Amazon.com. Thanks for watching.